And welcome back, fellow American patriots and Minutemen standing at the ready to fight anew for the issues that matter today on this cold Thursday. And folks, I cannot think of a greater issue that is of graver consequence to humanity than the misallocation of our investments, government tax breaks, land use to data centers in order to create this generative predictive AI that is not improving humanity, not creating efficiencies. In fact, we're seeing the economies in the toilet, no jobs created by the companies themselves that are engaged in this, except what it is doing is supplanting human dignity, supplanting the human experience, enshittifying the internet, and all around acculturating us to nothing but errors and laziness. And again, not in a way that's creative destruction, but in a way that is an absolute destruction and no benefit. And, you know, what you're watching in the gold and silver and really all commodity markets this week, with gold surging more than Nvidia's entire market share in just a matter of 3 days, what you're seeing is the real currency vetting out how all of these circle jerk investments are nothing. They're all fake. Because if we were on the cusp of an AI boom in the mode of every other industrialized boom that we've experienced in the past, you wouldn't be seeing gold going up 25%, silver up 65% in January, platinum, palladium up 25, 30%, copper hitting record highs, yet Microsoft and Apple down 5-8%. Okay, you wouldn't be seeing that. You wouldn't be seeing Amazon shedding 16,000 additional jobs, and really all these companies shedding jobs. And don't tell me, oh, AI has made it so efficient you don't need jobs, because the AI boom itself should be creating other jobs if there was something real. So we're going to get into this discussion with Gary Marcus, one of the really forefront guys who are at the forefront of AI thought as a cognitive scientist years ago, decades ago. But he's been warning that we are pursuing the entire wrong model, and we're taking a whole of government approach for the wrong things. I just want to get to a couple of news stories on this and other things before he comes on. So we are told, you don't understand, Daniel. We have to sacrifice our power, our water, our ag land, our quality of life in all these neighborhoods to build thousands of these dystopian buildings in order to power algorithmic slop. And somehow, if you throw enough slop in the machine, out pops a Zeus-like god that's going to be general intelligence and solve all of our problems and end all sickness and defeat all of our enemies. And we need to do that in order to defeat China. I've always noted one of the many problems with that thesis is that we're empowering and offering tax breaks and special governmental favors to the very companies that created China's program. Well, it turns out House Select Committee on China just put out a report under Congressman John Mulliar from Michigan. Nvidia evidently helped DeepSeek, China's company, hone AI models that were later used by China's military. So let me get this straight. We need to hand over our land and power and water and quality of life with tax breaks and special land favors, regulatory amnesty for these companies so they could basically hand over these same technologies to China. Oh, by the way, all the while China does it with less computing power and a fraction of the data centers. So they have much more gain for less pain, while we're just gobbling up the land and power with this nonsense in order to enshitify the internet and addict people to slop under the promise that we'll beat China with the same modality that these companies are also empowering China. So that entire thing is a complete joke. There's another side issue, and this is going to tie into the immigration stuff I want to get to, and then we'll get back to AI. So the tech CEOs are starting to break with Trump on immigration. This is what happens when you bring the foxes into the henhouse to then run the henhouse. So Trump has handed over his administration to the big tech bro CEOs. Now, all of them are complaining that they don't like the way he's using Palantir technology for ICE. So now they're imposing their values on us. Sam Altman was caught telling employees in an internal Slack message that what's happening with ICE is going too far. Anthropic CEO Dario, he called the situation a horror show. And then Apple's Tim Cook told employees he had a good conversation with Trump about de escalation. Well, is that just a coincidence that a few hours later, the Trump administration basically announces they're only targeting criminal aliens? They pulled out of Minneapolis. Now Susan Collins says that Kristi Noem told her they're pulling out all mass ICE arrests and operations from the entire state of Maine. So is this yet another example of big tech bro Akbar, that the tech bros basically run everything now and live by them, die by them? I mean, again, this is the problem when you think, oh, look, we're expanding the pie, we're growing a big tent. Well, then you have no tent because now a bunch of leftists run your policy. But then again, it's not like we were doing that much good with immigration anyway. Just a brief update with the immigration situation. So everyone's talking about a government shutdown. But the reality is, even if we have a brief shutdown, it's going to be over nothingness. It's not like Trump is demanding, as Chip Roy is trying to put provisions in the DHS appropriation bill to defund sanctuary cities, to defund federal judicial cases reviewing and enjoining deportations and ICE policy in general. No, it's all over a bunch of nothing. So basically, the White House is now begging the Democrats in the Senate to pass their budget bill, which, by the way, they were fine passing, to pass 5. So it's 6 appropriation bills, 5 of them, like defense, HUD, labor, education, HHS, pass that on a permanent basis for the remainder of the year. And then DHS will be just a stopgap, temporary bill until they can work out a negotiation. Well, what negotiation? He doesn't mean working on making the bill stronger like Chip Roy wants to do with jurisdiction stripping and defunding sanctuary cities. He means agreeing to some limitations on what they're already doing, which has only led to a few 100,000 removals after the first year. So this is just pathetic. I don't even know where we're headed here. Utterly pathetic. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. Sorry if it offends you. Another interesting story on the immigration front, but it's really about the judiciary. Remember how this Judge Patrick Schlitz from Minnesota ordered ICE Director, ICE Chief Todd Lyons to come before him and testify, stand before him like he's the king. You know what's interesting? On the internet, a bunch of people started digging up dirt on him that he donates to a bunch of these left-wing open border groups. And you know what? Just using the bully pulpit exposing the judge, he backed off and he issued this blustering order that's like, ICE is becoming a law unto itself and they're lawless. But then at the end of the day, through all of his bravado, he backed down on his demand that Todd come in front of him. Because perhaps there was finally some sort of inkling that he would say no. By the way, the executive branch does this all the time with Congress refusing to appear in front of them. Congress was meant to be 100 times more powerful, according to Madison, than the federal judiciary. So there's no reason we can't tell the courts to pound salt. And it just proves what I've said all along. Judicial supremacism is only undergirded by the will and desire of the other branches to give them effect. But if they were to even signal that they're going to ignore them, they would lose all their power. And that's why this Schlitz guy would have rather just rescind his fake order than have it, hang out there and he looks like a fool because the administration refuses to abide by it. That is the only way around this. I know I've been saying that we need to codify jurisdiction stripping in budget bills and must pass bills, but I only say that to put an exclamation mark on ignoring the courts. Because the bottom line is, if you don't want to do that, and you're only going to rely on Congress, I'm telling you, they're already ignoring jurisdiction stripping provisions that are already in the INA, a lot of them passed in the 96 IRA bill. And the judges just say, screw it, I'm going to hear the case anyway. So at some point, you got to say no. And I'm telling you, you do this one time, this entire scheme falls apart. But anyway, I do want to get back to the main course today. Of course, subscribe to our Substack, Daniel Horowitz Substack. I'm going to be a little bit slower this week. I might not put out another post till next week. I am taking a long weekend, so no show tomorrow. I'll be back on Monday. Also, make sure to subscribe and like our YouTube page, Horowitz Show. By the way, I've now had 2 shows spiked by YouTube where it's getting a bunch of views and then they freeze it. So yesterday's, because we talked about the Muslim invasion, evidently it didn't like that. So the point is, you have to subscribe directly so it comes into your feed. Otherwise, you won't see it. And again, this is why I'm going to try to build up Substack, which is the one thing that could go directly to your email where you don't have to rely on algorithmic slop. And speaking of algorithmic slop, let's turn to our guest for today. Folks, every technological boom, advancement in our history always resulted, at least on net, in the benefit, the enhancement of the human experience. Sure, there were things nostalgically that we kind of long for, that we maybe wish we could go back to, but in general, we've seen a lot of benefit from it because we didn't gaslight it with special governmental favors. I always say you didn't have a bunch of CEOs coming into the White House under Bush to invent the iPhone, Operation Stargate to invent it. It kind of went on its own. Yet here, what do we have? We have a technology that is being misallocated for these large language models, this predictive generative AI, and this pursuit of this chatbot slop that if we put everyone's life on the cloud and then build massive buildings, suck out the power and land and food and everything for it, somehow it's going to just spit back this general intelligence and we'll live happily ever after. But what we've seen so far is most studies show companies are not really benefiting from it. It looks cool at the beginning, but then all it does is prevent people from actually developing the brain capacity to do those tasks. So then when it makes mistakes and can't really complete it for you, so now often you're left worse off. Obviously, it's creating addictions and shitification of the internet, where the internet experience has downright regressed from 5 to 10 years ago in all aspects, and everyone agrees to that. So what are we getting for it? Now, you might say, well, okay, look, this is the trial and error, and it's not there yet. You're right, but it will get there. And that could be true in some way, but here's the problem. We have never had a technology where government used a whole of government approach. They themselves are saying Manhattan Project, tax breaks galore, property tax, sales tax, such a painful investment that's really nothing more than unproductive debt production in order to do it. That's the thing. You want to do it on your own, that's fine, but these special favors are ridiculous, especially when right now all it's doing is rotting out our brains, rotting out societal cohesion. Now, there is one man we've had on one other time who really was at the pioneer of this technology. Like myself, he is not against technology, just the opposite. He's outraged that we are misallocating capital to the wrong strategy of AI. He was called a Luddite, a few years ago when he dissented from the field. But now, boy, is he right. And I'm referring to Gary Marcus, a cognitive scientist, one of the leading experts in AI, who predicted everything we're experiencing today, plus more. And he's with us today. He has a terrific Substack. By the way, Gary Marcus Substack. I am addicted to it. I'd rather be addicted to that than chatbots. Welcome back, Gary, to Blaze Media.
Thanks for having me back. I agree
Yeah,
with
and
almost everything you said, or maybe exactly everything you said. What is going on right now is insane.
And look, Gary, like I look at your Substack. I don't care. No chatbot could replicate the humor, the style behind that. And I really want to delve into what it's doing to us because I know what it has not achieved yet. We've talked a lot about that. Nothing but unproductive debt and a bunch of these buildings going up. Friends of mine just in Henry County, Indiana, tried to fight this data center stealing ag land. They lost 2-1 last night. But you highlighted on your Substack this Boston University School of Law uh, paper, Hartzog and Silby, and I want to go through an outline of 3 to 4 of the points they make. One of them is because AI gives the illusion of accuracy and reliability, it looks impressive at first glance. It encourages cognitive offloading and skill atrophy and frustrates back end labor required to repair the hallucinations. Could you elaborate on that point? Because I think everyone is missing this elusive accuracy point.
Well, so the elusive accuracy point is one that I made a long time ago. And it goes back to how large language models actually work. They break every piece of information they see into little bits and they reconstruct it statistically. And that's just not sound. And so that's why they hallucinate, make silly reasoning errors. They're just giant approximation machines. I called them once, autocomplete on steroids. And that's what they are. And autocomplete works sometimes and not others. It's not really a reasoning machine. Sometimes it will imitate reasoning that it has seen in a database from human beings, but it's not really. And so it's unreliable. The new paper that you're talking about takes that point about unreliability, which we've known for a long time, and plays out some of the social consequences of it. So one of the social consequences is we have a whole generation of college students, for example, but it's not just college students. You already gave an example of somebody in the government who rely on these machines and they offload the intellectual work that they should be doing, which would allow them to learn or understand things, to these machines that are not that reliable. And they forget how to do things or they never learn how to do things. So, I used to be a professor for 25 years. The reason we gave people term papers was to help them develop their skills for critical thinking. If you have ChatGPT write the term paper, you might get a good grade, depending on policies at your school, whether you get caught or whatever. But you're certainly not going to learn anything. You just, hit a few things and you sent it off, and you're not getting that thing. It'd be like, I don't know, like weightlifting. Like you can't like watch somebody else do it on TV, right? You got to actually lift the weights. It's the same with your brain. And
Yep.
if you have ChatGPT substitute for you, it gets stronger. Actually, it doesn't really get stronger, but you certainly don't either, right? And so people are offloading that. They're offloading their human relationships. So they just type everything into ChatGPT. I went on a date and this happened and that happened. They're not really thinking about it. They're just like having somebody tell them what to do. They're not developing social skills. And then we see crazy things like, was it CISA you just mentioned? Somebody in the government put confidential things into ChatGPT. Now that's a different issue, but it's related. So these things also don't protect privacy very well. You shouldn't be putting sensitive information, and there's some kind of offloading of that person's responsibility. So there's a lot of that. Another point that the paper makes is about trust, right? We can't really trust the outputs of this stuff. It's kind of a new word that I like is work slop. I didn't coin it. It's a great term. You have these things, they write reports, they look good on a superficial inspection. I call it the looks good to me effect, but they're not really correct. And then you have all of the misinformation that these tools can produce at scale. I just had a paper with many other people in science about how there are swarms now of chatbots that can, and we'll see more and more of this, where not only do you have like one bot reproducing somebody else's line, but you're going to have a whole sea of fake agents basically producing things on social media to imply that there are, tens of thousands or millions of people with some view, and it's all just fake. Like, we're living in this world of fakery that undermines trust. That's what the Russians always wanted, the Russian fire hose of propaganda model. We are living in that where nobody trusts anything. It's not a healthy place for a society to be.
See, this is the thing. I'm big into technology, so I'm fine with, okay, you invent a washing machine, and now you kind of forget the skill, or most people forget how to hand wash a garment that's dirty, because it creates efficiency. But this is the interesting thing here. It's not creating jobs. In fact, we're seeing these companies are shedding jobs left and right. Amazon just announced
Not
60,000.
creating, can I just insert? It's not creating a lot of revenue either. There have been multiple studies now showing that the companies that are investing
Yep.
money in this stuff are not doing that well. So obviously Nvidia has done well, although it's down in the stock market today. But Nvidia has done well making chips that fuel all this stuff. But the customers who buy this stuff to use in their companies, first there was an MIT study showing 95% weren't getting return on investment. There was just another study by PwC showing that only 12% were really seeing of companies were really seeing ROI. So like the number of companies that are actually making money by using this stuff is small, because mostly they're getting work slop. They're getting stuff like, if they write code, it has to be debugged afterwards. If they write
Yep.
reports, there's mistakes in them. It's a mess.
In other words, we've never attempted to supplant this wide of a swath of the human experience, but then not actually be able to achieve it. So the only thing you are achieving is atrophying the human ability to.
That's
It's
right.
like getting rid of your
We,
crutch.
we are atrophying humanity based on a promise that is untrue, right? The promise that is untrue is that this stuff is magic, that it can do anything humans can do. Another study showed it could only do 2.5% of what humans do, right? I'm talking here about generative AI. Someday we may have AI that really deserves the level of acclaim that generative AI has been given, but generative AI does not. Generative AI has been hope. It's been selling hope that this stuff is going to work like magic. It doesn't really work like magic, but the negative consequences are already starting to roll in. Like, it has really been devastating, I think, for the 19 and 20-year-olds in college. They use it as a substitute for thought. They're not learning anything. And then those poor kids are getting on the other end because nobody's hiring junior level employees right now, which is going to haunt us later, because
Yep.
you need the mid-level employees, and you don't get them unless people are
You don't
junior
get
level
them.
employees.
And again, I don't even think AI is terminating those jobs. I think we're in a horrible recession, K-shaped economy in general. It's not creating, because again,
It's giving an excuse is what it's
for
doing.
every job it depletes, you would think, oh my gosh, this boom. But then you look, it's nothing but a circle jerk of financing of this unproductive debt. It's the input of debt, or at least pledged debt. In some cases, it's not even real. Then you have banks pulling out now. So, but we're still doubling down on this. Now, I found it interesting. I want to get your thought. Google DeepMind CEO, he recently acknowledged, surprisingly, and I think this gets to your thing about
He sounded
predictive
like me.
AI. What did he
Demis,
say? Something like that it only has pattern recognition, but it lacks reasoning to understand the trial and error experiments and
I
causality.
have literally been trying to tell the world that for the last 8 years. People have spurned me, called me a Luddite, ostracized me. But here's
Of course they
DeepMind,
have.
CEO, who I think is the smartest of Google. DeepMind's CEO is the smartest of these big CEOs, the only one who's a real scientist. And he came out and said exactly what I've been trying to say all along. These things, these large language models, are just pattern recognizers. They have their uses, sure, but they are not enough. The reasoning is not enough. This is not artificial general intelligence. He has built his entire career around building artificial general intelligence. He started this company, DeepMind, that Google bought. The goal is to build AGI. And he is here telling you, as I've been saying for a while, that this stuff is not, in fact, artificial general intelligence. All of the hits that we are taking as a society, that BU paper and many others have outlined, we're doing because many people are confused believed the hype of the Sam Altmans of the world and thought that this was or would soon be artificial general intelligence, that these chatbots would be. And they're not. They are pattern recognizers. They are not artificial general intelligence. They are not, in fact, going to radically revolutionize science or medicine or anything else. It is all bullshit. We've been selling us bullshit for the last 7 years, people like Altman and so forth, and it's becoming clear that the promises they have made are not going to come through, and yet we are still paying consequences as society. Same thing with all this deep fake porn, like we non-consensual deep fake porn. We have all these problems now caused by this technology, and the gains that the people building this tech promised us are not really there. I'm not saying nobody can find any use, like programmers can program a bit faster,
Yeah.
although the studies on that are actually mixed. One study shows that programmers actually do worse. But there are some legitimate uses for these things, but they do not justify the economics. You talked about misallocated capital. It's massive misallocated capital, and they don't justify the harms to society. And we haven't even talked about things like the possibility, which Dara Amodei just mentioned in his new paper, but things like bioweapons risk, right? Like there's a huge risk that this stuff is going to like tutor someone to build a bioweapon. Like there's all kinds of potential risks of this technology. And the payoff isn't really here for anybody except Jensen Huang. Like he's gotten a big payoff because people buy the chips because there's a gold rush. He's building shovels in the gold rush. But the gold that we're promised isn't really there. And yet we're kind of like ripping up the intellectual environment.
Although the real gold, I would say, is laughing out of their profits. And they're like, oh, Nvidia was up 50% last year. Well, gold and silver were up even more. So if you
Well, yeah,
peg the dollar
there's
to the
that funny
gold,
thing.
keep in mind, I don't know how well they're doing, and I think that's crashing down. But I want to get to some of the
Yeah, also,
yeah.
all of the big tech stocks, except for Meta, are down today, and most of them are down for the last few months. Even Nvidia, that was up like a rocket, is maybe flat over the last 3 months or something like that. Actually, Nvidia
Microsoft's
is
down
down.
like 8% in January.
Nvidia is down 10%, 9.4% in the last 3 months. Oracle, I wrote in my Substack, the moment when it leaped up, I called that peak bubble. It was at 350 and now it's at 164. So it's dropped by more than half since I wrote that piece about peak bubble. Like the market is starting to figure out that people had been lied to. Right? It took the market
Wall
a
Street definitely
while.
seems to be and some of the banks are also, JP Morgan is saying they're having trouble finding investors because it just doesn't make sense. And
It doesn't. It's like mass delusion. It's like tulip era stuff. Like when the Dutch were selling the tulips, and like you understand at the moment when people are selling tulips for more than a house, and maybe you should sell one too because you're like locked up in it. But you also know like the tulips aren't really worth that, and generative AI is not worth the kind of money. I just saw somebody once, or there's a rumor that OpenAI is about to raise money at a valuation of 730 billion before investment and whatever, eight something after. And that just doesn't make sense for a company that has never made a profit and doesn't have a clear path to a profit in a commodity business where Google has overtaken them. Like that's insane. It doesn't. So we still have little pockets of insanity, but we also have people coming to reality. They're not bidding up Nvidia that much anymore, and they're getting the hell out of Oracle.
no, I mean Oracle is really going to take it on the chin. And again, if
That is,
this
it's down
was the boom
60% or
that
whatever
they're
for the last 3 months.
yeah, the boom
Well,
that they're
40%
talking
for the last
about,
3 months.
that it justifies not paying sales taxes in almost all these states. If that were the case, you wouldn't have, like you said, these stocks going down the whole January. And gold went up the amount of Nvidia's entire market cap in 3 days after having already doubled over the last,
Yeah,
year or
I mean,
two.
I'm not exactly going to speak to gold, but indirectly, I'll say the phrase you hear now a lot is rotating out of the tech market, right? Which
Mm.
is to say, a lot of people on Wall Street have realized this is a scam and they're getting out. And some of them are putting it in gold, and some of them are putting it in, other places. But gold has been the big beneficiary so far.
Yeah, you wouldn't be seeing that if this was a tangible, sustainable, risk versus return and positive territory sort of thing. I want to get back to this, just in shitifying society in our brains.
Yeah.
My biggest concern is acculturating people to mediocrity, errors, and really a culture of just good enough. That it appears good because it answers you almost like in first person. Oh, it's solving my problems. But then they're gonna shove us on a system where you basically have to always use it. And then the society is now built on something that would have never naturally gotten off the ground in the free market. But now we're all going to be subject to just good enough.
Are you old enough to remember when there was a big scandal about the Pentium chip, the Pentium processor
Yes,
that was in IBM PCs? So
late 90s.
it
Yeah.
it did integer arithmetic perfectly, but there's something called floating point arithmetic, which is just like it sounds, and it made a mistake like 1 in a trillion times or something like that, and it was an enormous scandal. They lost $500 million, which was like a lot of money in those days because it was in the 90s, and it was just a huge embarrassment for Intel and so forth. There is nothing that a large language model does where it's only wrong once in a trillion times, right? Large language models, most of the things they do, they're wrong like 1 out of 5, 1 out of 10, or whatever. They're often wrong. There's a military phrase I learned, which is great for generative AI, which is frequently wrong, never in doubt. It will always tell you the answer as if it was true, but it's often wrong. And the thing that has most astonished me about this era is how tolerant people have been of these answers that are often wrong. But what seems okay in the moment often isn't. And so like people write their report for their job or whatever, and it looks good enough to them. And it's actually garbage. It's actually gunking stuff up. And Cory Doctorow's wonderful term about enshittification. I predicted that would be what would happen with all this stuff, and it is, right? Like as you
The
said, the
internet
quality of the
sucks.
internet.
I mean, like, this is why I applaud you, unlike me, for getting off of Twitter and going to Substack. Well, I mean, you've had the Substack, but like, there you put it directly in people's emails so you can get it. Whereas with Twitter, it's an algorithmic brothel.
It's can I say shit show on your show?
Yeah.
It's an algorithmic shit show. It totally is. I finally quit because it's like, what happened to this place? It was never perfect, but it was a kind of intellectual place where you could have an argument, and it just isn't anymore. I finally decided it was a waste of time, and I left a couple months ago. Yeah, and I mean, Substack is a place where you can make a reasoned argument, and I mean that goes back to a lot of what we're talking about. And I don't mean to dump on Twitter too much right now, but it's symptomatic of the social media era and of people losing critical thinking skills, right? Democracy is supposed to live and die on people making reasoned evaluations of how the world is acting relative to their, moral axioms and so forth. So, I believe that we should distribute wealth relatively equally or whatever, and you think you take a more asymmetric view or whatever, and then you say, and relative to what I see now, that's working well or it's not working well, we should tinker it this way. But you have to know how it's working well to make those choices, right? And we're now living in an environment where people don't know how to reason, don't get examples of reasoning because all they see are TikTok videos and tweets and stuff like that. They're not, going to college and learning to write term papers, and they're not getting accurate information. It's just a mess.
And then they develop these bizarre mannerisms. So it's like the algorithms know what is going to be successful on social media, and they create a self-fulfilling reality. So then people mimic these. Like, I see this bizarre terminology and rhetorical refrains that people wouldn't otherwise use. You know what I found interesting? So a couple weeks ago, I did a really good show. Maybe it was last week, and it got nailed. It got it hit a brick wall, and on YouTube it just went to zero. Never went up a single click. It got hit for copyright. Oh, what's copyright? I was playing an ad of a congressman who was playing Trump dancing to YMCA, but I got hit with copyright because it recognized YMCA. And these videos are
Let's
everywhere.
not start singing it, or this will take a copyright hit. I
No,
mean, when you have
that's the problem.
automation, when you have automation, which YouTube does need to have, you're not actually reasoning about, is this fair use? Why is it there? How is it being used? And so
Yeah.
forth. And it goes to another point, which is we are ceding too much of our power to algorithms that are often, very unsophisticated. So they don't know the difference between fair use, where you're referencing a song, and where you're actually playing it or whatever. We're ceding so much power. Sometimes people do that deliberately. They want to blame the machine, like they make the background decision and then they're like, well, the machine did that. But in any case, we are yielding too much power to AI that's not that sophisticated. Let me take a big step back, which is, we've been talking about generative AI, which is large language models that are trained on the internet, are not very good at reasoning. Is what we have. It's the best thing that we have right now going, but it's not that good. When we go to 2035, 2036, a decade from now, we're going to look back and say that was garbage. Those guys were right that AI is interesting and can be useful, but they were trying to make this system that didn't really work. They were jamming a square peg into a round hole everywhere, and they were so fucking arrogant about it in 2025, 2026. And then there was like a great retrenchment, and then we figured out how to do it for real. Now we have AI in 2036 that we can actually trust. Those guys were like the early days of cars with no seatbelts and like no understanding of safety or whatever.
But the difference is, and that's the thing, trial and error is fine, but never in our history have we misallocated this much capital at such a painful cost with this data center model. That's my problem. Like, you want to experiment and dabble, that's fine. But these
part of the problem is the scale. That's right. So I agree with you. There's nothing wrong with trial and error, but the scale at which people are doing it, both in terms of how many people in society are being brought along as unwilling participants, and also the scale of how much money. So I'm worried both about the social consequences and the economic consequences. On the economic side of it, it's going to be like when we built too many shopping malls or something like that. Or, China has built too much housing. It's really destroying their economy now. There is no way we are going to need all these data centers. Companies aren't actually making money of this. They're gradually pulling back, realizing it doesn't make sense. And you have the Sam Altmans of the world still trying to spend $7 trillion, like playing double or nothing, hoping somehow this is going to work out. And we're all going to be left holding the bag. I mean, everybody's going to have a data center in their backyard that nobody really uses. Like, in the end, like this stuff, some of it's going to be used to like stream video games or something like that. They'll find some use, but it's not going to make that much money, and we won't really need it. And we will have spent so much money. There's probably going to be government bailouts. It's very easy to imagine, people saying, "Oh, but we need to beat China," which is kind of a silly argument, because we're going to build LLMs and they're going to build LLMs. We don't really need to beat China. It's more like Coke and Pepsi. We're going to have our Coke. They're going to have their Pepsi. There's
and our Coke companies are going to help build their Pepsi.
And our Coke companies may help build their Pepsi, especially if we get a cut and whatever. Like, that whole thing is just nonsense. And so at the end of the day, LLMs aren't going to make that much money for anybody except Nvidia. And even Nvidia is not going to be in this princely position for very long. Like, Tencent just rolled out their own GPUs, or announced or whatever, their own GPUs. Nvidia has these huge margins, but Google's going to go after them, Tencent's going to go after them, etc. Eventually, all of this stuff is going to be commodities. The chips, the large language models, nobody's going to make that much money off of them. They'll still exist, they'll still get used, but it's just not going to be the big money maker that people think. And so much money is going to be wasted, and so many people, so many taxpayers are going to be forced to bail out this utter mess, all of which was built on a fantasy that Sam Altman told people about how this is going to be artificial general intelligence and it's going to magically like 100x productivity. Like, we had these, talk about, doing the work of 10 employees or whatever, and you see the actual studies, nobody's getting that.
Nobody is. And my fear is based on what you're saying in the long run. And I don't mean like 20 years, but within the next few years, we might start seeing gaps that were created, gaps in atrophied knowledge, that it's actually going to be a net liability.
That's right. We're destroying the education of high school and college students. And like, China is not doing that. If you really want to worry about China, I would be worried about them beating us on research, beating us on education, not beating us on LLMs. Like, LLMs are not going to be a big profit item. Google's going to keep making them no matter what happens in China. Meta's going to keep making them. Like, we're focusing on the wrong battles here.
Yes.
The right battle is how do we maintain our society in light of all of this change? The wrong battle is how do we win this like very low margin business? You might as well say, let's race China on assembling iPhones. Like, we're not going to do that. Like, it doesn't make sense. We're not going to build iPhones for cheapest in the United States. Like, that would be a stupid battle, but this is a stupid battle too. And meanwhile, we're giving so much power to these companies, completely unregulating them. We're leaving it so the American citizens are vulnerable. Education doesn't work. Democracy is in trouble. Like, the decisions being made right now are just not good decisions.
One other thing, just real quick from that Boston paper, I want you to explain to our audience. One of the things identified is that it lacks intellectual risk, meaning it can't challenge the status quo because its voice has no weight. What does that mean?
I mean, I'll put it in a slightly different terms, my own terms, which is these systems tend not to go outside the box. What they do is, roughly speaking, regurgitate what they've seen before. And the best ideas often come from going outside the box. And that's not what they're good at. So you ask them for something, you get the most generic thing possible. And that's fine for some purposes, but real innovation comes from going outside the box, and they're just not that good at it. And so if you have your whole society run basically by a conformist system, then you just perpetuate whatever's going on, and you don't develop new things, you don't take risks. It's not a good innovation tool, ironically, since everybody's talking about it as being innovation, but there's not that much actual innovation that's come out of a large language model.
And okay, the innovation thing, another thing that gets me with this, the lack of innovation, typically a product that is earth-shattering, that's a breakthrough, cathartic for society, it doesn't need to break laws and steal in order to get ahead. So Anthropic is now facing a lawsuit, but we're seeing a lot of these for pirating music for their chatbot, Claude, I guess. You're seeing a lot of this, that it's
I know
gobbling up
about
books.
Anthropic's lawsuits around books. I don't know about them being sued around music. I don't think they're doing
So
as much
music
music
just came out. It just came out yesterday. This is for
Okay.
their
I didn't see that one.
yeah,
Okay.
Universal Music Group Concord and ABKCO are accusing them of pirating their songs. And
Anthropic is,
yeah,
or maybe it's the lyrics of their songs rather
yeah.
than the melodies and so forth. I don't know. I'll have to look at that. Anyway, question?
No. So anyway, my point is this why they are so anti-regulation, state regulation? Because in order to purvey this predictive model by creating this box, training it on everything around, it needs to gobble up everything that it could find, and intellectual property rights stands in the way.
Well, I wouldn't specifically pin that on Anthropic. Anthropic has ripped off a lot of stuff. They just lost a huge lawsuit, $1.5 billion lawsuit, but they're hardly alone in that. And Anthropic's actually one of the few companies that actually supports AI regulation. Most of them oppose. One of the reasons that most of them oppose is what you're talking about, which is they all do want the right to gobble up all of human intellectual property for free, which I think is completely outrageous. The actress Justine Bateman called it the biggest theft in U.S. history. I think she's right. So, there are multiple fronts they want to fight regulation. One of them is they want free intellectual property, and who wouldn't, right? But we shouldn't give it to them. You might want my car. That doesn't mean I should give it to you, right? I paid for it. I wrote my books. I earned the right to profit from them, but Anthropic just stole them from me. And a legal decision proved that. It looks like Meta did the same, and so they're stealing from us left, right, and center. There are other things too. They don't want to have any liability, so they fought this law in California that would have given them liability for major catastrophes. So if one of these things sets off a bioweapon or teaches someone to build a bioweapon that kills, 1 million people, they don't want to be liable for that. But maybe they should be, right? So, they don't want any liability. They don't want to pay for the stuff that is the raw materials. Like, imagine if I was McDonald's and I said, hey, you know what? We can beat China on profitability for hamburgers if you let us have the cows for free. Like, you would laugh in their face. You'd be like, what are you talking about? But that is what the AI companies are doing. They're saying, we can beat China if you let us have the raw materials for free. Never mind that we're stealing them from artists and writers and publishers and so forth. We want them for free so we can beat China. Well,
In other words, any product or innovation that truly does succeed, typically it means that it's able to navigate within society, within civilization. It could operate without
Yeah,
supplanting human
stand on
beings.
its own 2 feet without being criminal, right? That's what, a good company ought to do. And, Google for many years until they started this part were basically doing that, right? They found a nice deal. They'll search for stuff and we'll give you ads. There was nothing criminal about it.
Yeah.
But stealing intellectual property to regurgitate it, in my mind, is criminal. I mean, I guess there's, pending legal decisions, but at least at an abstract level, it's criminal. And that is basically the business model here. And then there's so many consequences. It's like when steel companies belch out all of this stuff into the water, there's all the consequences for, intellectual life, for democracy, for society, etc. And they're just offloading all of that into society, not taking any responsibility. These companies are not even good citizens. These companies are awful. They're rapacious. They're stealing, and they're not standing on their own TV. They're not actually making a profit. And OpenAI was hinting that they're going to want government bailouts. It's like, we're going to lose all this money. You're going to give us more money. We're going to steal this stuff.
They're already getting a bailout.
Businesses.
Let me give you an example. We're losing farms and ranches, record speed. We actually that's what we need. We need a Manhattan Project with that. And why? Well, if I own a ranch, I have to pay death taxes if I inherit it. I have to pay, land depreciation is crazy, so real estate taxes are very high, and I have to pay sales tax on every tractor, anything I buy. But if you now buy that for a data center, because they know depreciation within 3 to 5 years, so it wouldn't be solvent without 30-year tax abatements. Well, if it's not solvent, then maybe we ought not steer the capital there.
Somehow the administration has decided that they want to back this bet, and they're doing all kinds of things that if we did in any other domain, we would say is pretty unethical.
Wow, no, that's pretty harsh. I know you got to run. I just want to land this plane on the positive, more like what we should be doing. My concern of this misallocation of capital is that I believe we're doubling down on what you identified as stupid years ago, rather than steering it towards more auspicious potential for AI, better uses, better models. What does that look like in your mind?
I mean, the biggest thing the United States should be doing right now is investing in alternative approaches to AI, because this one, the limits on it are just becoming very clear. They were clear to me a long time ago, but now they're clear to people like Demis Hassabis, Ilya Sutskever, Rich Sutton, Jan LeCun. All these people now see those limits. And so pouring, another $1 trillion, it's the classic, good money after bad. And at the same time, like, immigration is a very complex issue, but we need to allow immigrants to come into the country to help with that research. So much of that research historically has been done by immigrants. And so, keeping immigrants out is not the way to make us strong. We want all the smartest people here helping us develop the smartest ideas. And we need to keep our universities strong. Somehow Trump is at war with the universities. I don't know, is it an ego thing or what is driving that? But it's just not a good idea. The reason we have been dominant for the last 70 or whatever years is in large part because of our universities that have been so good at sponsoring research and sponsoring intellectuals who made this country a better place. And we're just decimating all of this. It's like playing into the hands of China, right? I mean, the big battle of this century is US versus China, and we're just giving them a free ride. Their universities are overtaking ours. We've historically been better at research, but we're giving up on that.
What about in terms of the models? You've written on your Substack about world models. We should be pursuing world models. For those that don't understand, what is a world model versus a traditional LLM?
So an LLM is just breaking information into little statistical bits. A world model is more like an encyclopedia, a database, or something like that has representations of inside its system of particular objects, places, events, causal principles, and things like that. You might have multiple world models. So my children have a world model for Harry Potter that's different from the actual world, but they know with respect to Harry Potter, these are the characters, the things that they do, who they are, and so forth. Classical artificial intelligence uses world models, but these neural networks tried very hard to get away without them. And I kept saying, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. And now people are realizing it's not going to work. And we're trying to figure out now how to bring together these techniques with the classical techniques where you actually have a world model. These are the entities and so forth. In LLMs, it's all fakery. And you can see that in something like chess, right? They get trained on millions of games of chess. They can sometimes play chess if you stick to the kind of traditional moves. But when you move out of the traditional chess openings, they start making illegal moves because they don't actually understand, even like what a knight is or what a bishop is, or, that a queen can't jump over a knight and stuff like that. It's really bad when you look at these careful examples. An LLM does not actually develop a model of how chess works that it can function over. Whereas, like my daughter, when she was 6, had that down and she could play just fine and didn't make illegal moves and so forth.
Well, God created us with IQ and EQ as well, emotional intelligence, and I think this is what we're all losing, all based on anti-market policies. I would argue that are misallocating capital. I know you don't take much pleasure in being right. You would rather them change policies, but I
I
I definitely appreciate you being at the forefront of this and speaking out
thank
because we need a course correction.
thank you very much, and thanks for the platform. Appreciate it.
Alrighty. Well, anyway, Gary Marcus Substack. Make sure you guys subscribe there. It is absolutely a must read Substack. Just one brief note, obviously, there in a point of disagreement. He brought up immigration. Look, I mean, one of the part of the problem is when the right becomes so stupid and has no people actually holding Trump accountable on big tech. So yeah, honestly, there's more voices on the left. I don't know if he's pure left or he's kind of centrist or eclectic on that. Obviously he's not where I am on immigration. I would argue, the pushback I would just give on that, his point on immigration, is just that to the extent that Trump is slowing down the universities at the immigration at all, it's very, very recent. Whereas the decline of universities versus China has been baked in for at least a few years, if not a number of years, while we had record immigration. So if immigration were the key to our universities, well, I mean, the last generation, we've tripled our foreign intake. So that would be the key to it. It's not. It's smarter education. You need a more cohesive society. You can't have a balkanized society. We could debate about how much that is. So yeah, obviously I disagree with Gary on that point, but on the tech points, I certainly agree with. And this is part of the problem. I mean, this is a very serious issue. Also, if you're a social conservative, you can't support this stuff. And honestly, I'm having trouble finding voices on the right to even address this issue. So yeah, we found a lot of non-traditional conservatives, but then again, the conservatives themselves aren't really traditional in that sense because it's all about Metatomb and things like that. Anyway, I will be out for tomorrow. I'll be back on Monday. So we'll see how this partial government shutdown plays out. Heck, the federal government has been shut down half the week because of the snowstorm, which wasn't even that big in DC anyway. So it's all a joke. But just like the first shutdown, it's they're fighting over nothing. It's not even that the Republicans want to do something big with this bill. Democrats are just grandstanding for their base, honestly, about a bill that they supported 3 minutes ago, because sadly, from our perspective, it doesn't really do much. So let me know your comments, questions, concerns, your comments on our guest, Daniel Horowitz at StartMail is the email. Make sure you like and subscribe our channel at YouTube Horowitz Show or Substack, Liberating Truths. And if you could find me at Twitter at RM Conservative. Hope you guys have a terrific family-oriented weekend. Stay off the chatbot slop and have some human to human interaction. See you back here, same time, same place, Monday.